What's going on, everybody? Cleopus Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Cricut Ovation 3 and the TCL 30Z. Now, before we go any further, as always, I do want to remind you to hit that subscribe button. And in case you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about each of them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Cricut Ovation 3, we're getting a really large 6.82-inch IPS LCD display with a 720p resolution, a PPI of 246, and an aspect ratio of 20.5:9. With the TCL 30Z, we're getting a 6.1-inch IPS LCD display. This phone also has a 720p resolution, a PPI of 282, and an aspect ratio of 19.5:9. So in general, for what they are, both phones do have pretty decent displays, but the Cricut Ovation 3 definitely has quite an advantage, having a clearly larger display and definitely not by a small amount either. This is going to make things, of course, a lot larger and easier to see, so especially if you're doing something like reading, for example, or you're just going to be on your phone a lot, the display size we're getting with the Cricut Ovation 3 is definitely going to be a great advantage. In addition to this, with a 20.5:9 aspect ratio versus 19.5:9 with the TCL 30Z, the Cricut Ovation 3 also has a much taller and more narrow form factor, and this is going to give you a more immersive experience in landscape mode. And if you're doing something like reading, using social media, browsing the web, stuff like that, with a form factor like this, you can fit more content on the screen without having to scroll as much. So in general, on one hand, the TCL 30Z definitely doesn't have a bad display, and especially for what it is, the image quality, especially when it comes to color, is still really nice. But that being said, if you're going to be on your phone a little bit more, then having a larger display with a better form factor honestly is such an advantage that I would say the Cricut Ovation 3 will be a better choice. Now for storage, both phones are getting 32GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and honestly this is kind of unfortunate because in this day and age, 32GB really isn't a whole lot. So unless you have like 5 apps and you're barely putting anything on your phone, storage honestly is going to be pretty tight with these phones. But to be fair, pretty much every phone in this price range is going to have the same kind of storage. Even at this point, there aren't really too many super entry-level phones that have more storage than 32GB, which in my opinion is kind of weird, considering at this point everything else about entry-level phones is starting to get better and better. But all the same, if storage is really important to you, then I would definitely recommend spending a bit more and getting a phone that has at least 64GB, if not 128. But if you're really using your phone for the bare minimum, then as long as you're careful about what you're putting on your phone, you should at least be okay, especially considering, again, both phones do at least have microSD card expansion. So if you want to offload stuff like photos and videos and stuff like that, that will help a little. Now for security features, with the Cricut Ovation 3, we are getting Face Unlock and a fingerprint scanner right here in the back. But with the TCL 30Z, although this phone does at least have Face Unlock, there is no fingerprint scanner here. So if you do want a fingerprint scanner, then the Cricut Ovation 3 of course will have an advantage. But let's go ahead and give it a try real quick. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see, real fast and responsive, no issues at all. And again, this phone does have Face Unlock too. It's just that with the TCL 30Z, again, this phone does not have a fingerprint scanner. So if you do want one, then you might be happier with the Cricut Ovation 3. Now for the camera setups here, there's quite a difference. With the Cricut Ovation 3, we got a water drop notch for the front facing camera. This camera is 8 megapixels. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 13 megapixel main camera, a 5 megapixel ultra wide camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. On the other hand, with the TCL 30Z, we got another water drop notch front facing camera. This camera is 5 megapixels, but on the back, we just got a single camera, and this camera is 8 megapixels. So when it comes to features, as you can see, the Cricut Ovation 3 definitely has quite an advantage, having both an ultra wide camera and a macro camera. So honestly, even though this is a really low end phone, it has pretty much all the camera features. And while the photo quality is not going to be nearly as good as a mid-range phone, for example, if you're just taking pictures here and there for stuff like social media, and you want things to look decently nice, but you don't need amazing quality or anything like that, then honestly, the Cricut Ovation 3 is going to be perfectly fine. With the TCL 30Z though, although the quality isn't really terrible per se, I definitely wouldn't count on this phone for something like social media. The photos just really aren't that great. So in general, if the camera is important to you, then hands down, the Cricut Ovation 3 will be a much better choice. But if you're maybe just using a barcode scanner, or maybe something like Snapchat where the quality just really doesn't matter, then I guess the TCL 30Z will at least be okay. Now, when it comes to RAM and processor, with the Cricut Ovation 3, we're getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A25 processor. With the TCL 30Z, we're also getting 3GB of RAM with the MediaTek Helio A22. Now, when it comes to overall performance, as you can probably imagine, neither of these phones is really super fast or anything. And if you're going to be on your device all day, especially doing more demanding activities, then you are going to want to spend a bit more and get something quite a bit faster. That being said though, for more basic activities like web browsing, social media, and I mean like really occasional social media, not like being on TikTok all day or something, then listening to stuff like music, streaming the occasional video here and there, for that kind of thing, either phone will at least be good enough to get the job done. But between the two, the Cricut Ovation 3 is going to be a bit faster. So if you're going to be on your phone a little bit more, then definitely keep this in mind. Now, I did run Geekbench 5 benchmark tests on both phones, And here are the scores I got. So again, as you can see here, the Cricut Ovation 3 does have quite an advantage, but keep in mind, even the Cricut Ovation 3 really isn't that fast, and if you're going to be on your phone all day and just using it for a lot of different things, then you're probably still going to want to get something faster. But again, for more basic use, it really just comes down to how much you're going to be using your phone. On one hand, if you're barely ever doing anything on it, maybe you're really just using it for calls, texts, and then listening to music or something, in that situation, the TCL 30Z is going to be perfectly fine. But if you're going to be doing stuff like web browsing, social media, and just generally using more features, then again, you will get a better experience with the Cricut Ovation 3. Now for the batteries, with the Cricut Ovation 3, we're getting a 4000 mAh battery that supports 10 watt fast charging, and with the TCL 30Z, we're getting a 3000 mAh battery. So between the two, the Cricut Ovation 3 definitely has an advantage, having a significantly larger battery. So if battery life is more of a priority for you, then definitely keep this in mind. Another thing I do want to point out here is that with the TCL 30Z, the battery is actually removable. So make of this what you will. Some people like the feature, some people don't. But in case you're wondering, taking the battery out is actually really easy. Simply pull in this little tab right here. The back is going to snap right off. And there we go, that's pretty much it. Also from here, you can access the SIM card and the micro SD card. So a little different compared to your average phone in 2023, but in general, it's nothing too crazy. Now, when it comes to software, both phones do have Android 12, so granted it's not Android 13, but considering these are really entry-level devices, I'm glad we're at least getting something decently newer. As far as other features go, with the Cricut Ovation 3, we are actually getting NFC, whereas unfortunately we're not with the TCL 30Z. Now, in case you don't know what it is, NFC is basically what you use for tap and pay, so if you do like to use that feature, then again, keep in mind, the Cricut Ovation 3 does actually have it, whereas the TCL 30Z doesn't. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? In general, I feel like in pretty much every way where there's actually a difference, the Cricut Ovation 3 is a better device. This phone has a much larger display with better dimensions. So again, if you're going to be on your phone a lot, things are going to be easier to see on the Cricut Ovation 3. This phone also has a much better camera setup with both an ultra-wide camera and a macro camera, whereas the TCL 30Z has pretty much nothing. So again, if you're taking a decent amount of pictures, you are going to be a lot happier with the Cricut Ovation 3. In addition to this, it has significantly better performance, a larger battery, and again, it does have NFC, so you can use tap and pay with this phone, whereas you can't do that with the TCL 30Z. So in general, if you're looking for an affordable entry-level phone for more basic use, and despite being more of a light user, you still want a decent camera, acceptable performance, a larger display, and a pretty good battery, then in that case, the Cricut Ovation 3 is going to be a great option for you. But this concludes my comparison between the Cricut Ovation 3 and the TCL 30Z. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, I will be linking to several other videos about each of them in the description, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipis Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.